Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. A comprehensive analysis of self-discipline, humility, and personal mastery, an in-depth exploration of Stoic philosophy and practical wisdom. Table of Contents. 1. Introduction. Understanding the enemy within. 2. The nature of ego. Definition and manifestation. Part 1. Aspire, the beginning of the journey. 4. Part 2, Success, the dangerous peak. 5. Part 3, Failure, the opportunity for growth. 6. Stoic philosophy, the foundation. 7. Historical examples and case studies. Practical applications for daily life. 9. The paradox of ego. Conclusion, the path forward. Introduction. Understanding the enemy. Within Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy, presents a provocative thesis that challenges modern culture's celebration of self-confidence and self-promotion. At its core, the book argues that our greatest obstacle to success, happiness, and self-improvement is not external competition, systemic barriers, or bad luck, but rather our own inflated sense of self-importance. This enemy, which Holiday calls ego, sabotages us at every turn, distorting our perception of reality, preventing genuine learning, and ultimately derailing our most important goals. The book is not an attack on confidence, ambition, or self-respect. Rather, it's a surgical examination of the unhealthy belief in our own importance that disconnects us from reality. Holiday draws extensively on Stoic philosophy, particularly the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, while illustrating his points with compelling historical examples ranging from ancient generals to modern entrepreneurs. What makes this work particularly powerful is its structure around 3 critical phases of life: aspire, when we're striving toward our goals; success, when we've achieved something; and failure, when things fall apart. In each phase, ego manifests differently and requires different strategies to overcome. This framework provides both a diagnostic tool for identifying how ego is operating in our lives and a roadmap for transcending its limitations. The central insight of the book is paradoxical. By fighting our ego and cultivating genuine humility, we actually achieve more of what ego falsely promises. When we stop believing we're special and start doing the work. When we stop seeking recognition and start creating value. When we stop defending our self-image and start learning from failure, we become more effective, more resilient, and more fulfilled. This is not self-help platitude, but hard-won wisdom distilled from thousands of years of philosophical thought and historical experience. 1. The nature of ego. Definition and manifestation. Defining ego, Holiday is careful to distinguish ego from related concepts that are often confused with it. Ego is not confidence, which is a realistic assessment of one's abilities based on competence and experience. It's not ambition, which is the desire to achieve meaningful goals. It's not pride in one's work, which can be a healthy recognition of genuine accomplishment. Instead, ego is an unhealthy belief in our own importance that operates independent of our actual abilities, achievements, or value. At its essence, ego is a story we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's the voice that says we're naturally gifted, that we deserve more than we've earned, that the rules applying to others don't apply to us, that our failures are always someone else's fault, and that our successes are entirely our own doing. Ego is fundamentally dishonest because it distorts reality to protect our self-image. The manifestation of ego varies depending on our circumstances. In aspiration, ego makes us talk instead of work, seek validation instead of competence, and prioritize appearing successful over becoming successful. In success, ego tells us we've figured everything out, that we no longer need to learn, that we're special and exempt from ordinary constraints. In failure, ego either refuses to acknowledge reality or collapses into self-pity and victimhood. None of these responses serve us. The psychological roots of ego, understanding why ego exists, helps us fight it more effectively. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, a certain degree of self-regard was adaptive for our ancestors. Believing in oneself encouraged risk-taking necessary for survival and reproduction. Social status provided access to resources and mates. The problem is that modern ego often operates disconnected from reality in ways that would have been dangerous in ancestral environments. Ego also serves a protective function for the psyche. When reality threatens our self-conception, ego steps in with alternative explanations that preserve our self-image. We didn't fail because we were unprepared. The test was unfair. We didn't get promoted because we lack skills. Our boss is biased. This psychological defense mechanism protects us from painful truths, but prevents the learning that comes from honest self-assessment. Modern culture amplifies ego through social media, participation trophies, and the therapeutic culture that prioritizes self-esteem over self-discipline. We're told from childhood that we're special, that we should follow our passion, that we deserve happiness. While well-intentioned, these messages often create unrealistic expectations and fragile self-concepts that crumble when confronted with reality's indifference to our feelings of entitlement. 2. Part 1. Aspire. The beginning of the journey. Talk, talk, talk. The seduction of speaking over doing one of ego's most insidious manifestations in the aspiring phase is the tendency to talk about our goals instead of working toward them. Holiday cites research showing that when we share our intentions, we experience a premature sense of accomplishment that actually reduces our motivation to do the difficult work required for actual achievement. The brain's reward centers respond to social validation of our stated intentions, similarly to how they would respond to actual accomplishment. This phenomenon explains why so many people with grand plans accomplish so little. They spend their energy broadcasting their intentions on social media, impressing friends with their vision, and crafting their personal brand rather than developing actual skills. The person who talks constantly about writing a novel rarely writes one. The aspiring entrepreneur who's always pitching their startup idea rarely builds a sustainable business. Talk is a substitute for work. And ego encourages this substitution because talk is easier and provides more immediate gratification. Holiday advocates for a different approach. Silence and action. Let your work speak for itself. Build something real before you announce it. Develop genuine competence before you claim expertise. This requires tremendous discipline because modern culture rewards self-promotion and punishes those who quietly do excellent work without fanfare. But the historical record is clear. The people who achieve the most substantial and lasting success are typically those who spent years in obscurity developing their craft before anyone noticed. The antidote to empty talk is what Holiday calls practical wisdom, the kind of knowledge that comes only from doing. You can't talk your way to mastery. You can't imagine your way to competence. You have to do the repetitions, make the mistakes, receive the feedback, and iterate. Every minute spent talking about what you're going to do is a minute not spent actually doing it. Ego loves the former, character demands the latter. To be or to do, the fundamental choice. Holiday introduces a powerful framework from military strategist John Boyd, who would ask his protégés a crucial question. Do you want to be someone important, or do you want to do important things? The implication is that you can rarely have both. The person focused on being wants the title, the corner office, the recognition, the status symbols. The person focused on doing wants to solve the problem, create the value, accomplish the mission, regardless of who gets credit. This choice appears constantly throughout our careers and lives. Do you take the prestigious position that looks good on your resume but doesn't align with your values? Or do you take the unglamorous role where you can make a real difference? Do you speak up in the meeting to look smart? Or do you stay quiet when you have nothing substantive to contribute? Do you optimize for looking successful on social media or for actually building something meaningful? The person who chooses to be is driven by ego. They want others to think well of them, to recognize their importance, to validate their self-conception. This means they're constantly dependent on external approval and vulnerable to any threat to their status. The person who chooses to do is driven by purpose. They want to accomplish something larger than themselves, contribute something meaningful, solve important problems. This makes them more resilient, more focused, and paradoxically, often more successful in conventional terms. Boyd himself exemplified this principle. Despite being one of the most influential military strategists of the 20th century, he retired as a colonel rather than a general because he refused to play the political games required for advancement. He chose to do important work, revolutionizing fighter tactics, influencing the strategic thinking of multiple generations, over being someone important. History vindicated his choice. Become a student. The necessity of humility in learning, ego's greatest enemy, is the student mindset, because learning requires admitting what you don't know. Holiday argues that the most successful people maintain this mindset throughout their lives, constantly seeking teachers, accepting criticism, and remaining humble enough to acknowledge their ignorance. The moment someone believes they've learned everything is the moment their growth stops. Being a student means more than formal education. It means approaching every experience with curiosity rather than judgment, asking questions rather than asserting opinions, seeking feedback rather than defending your position. It means finding mentors who know more than you do and actually listening to them rather than just waiting for your turn to speak. It means reading widely, studying carefully, and practicing deliberately. Ego resists this because being a student puts us in a vulnerable position. We have to admit we don't know something. We have to risk looking foolish by asking basic questions. We have to accept that others know more than we do. We have to subordinate ourselves to teachers and processes that may be uncomfortable or tedious. All of this threatens our self-image as competent, knowledgeable, already successful people. Yet the alternative is stagnation. The person who thinks they already know doesn't learn from their experiences. They repeat the same mistakes because they can't acknowledge making mistakes in the first place. They dismiss feedback that doesn't confirm their existing beliefs. They miss opportunities to improve because they're too busy defending their current level of performance. This is why so many talented people plateau early. Their ego won't let them remain students. The student mindset also changes how we relate to success and failure. Success becomes an opportunity to learn what worked and why, not proof that we're special. Failure becomes information about what needs improvement, not an indictment of our worth. Both become data points in an ongoing education rather than final judgments on our identity. Don't be passionate, purpose over emotion. In a culture that celebrates passion, Holiday's advice to avoid it seems counterintuitive, but he's not arguing against caring deeply about your work. He's arguing against the ego-driven emotionalism that often masquerades as passion. True passion is focused outward on the work itself. Ego passion is focused inward on our feelings about ourselves. Passion without purpose is just ego. It's the entrepreneur who's passionate about being an entrepreneur but hasn't identified a real problem to solve. It's the aspiring artist who's passionate about being artistic but won't do the unglamorous technical work required for mastery. It's the self-help enthusiast who's passionate about personal growth but never actually changes their behavior. In all these cases, passion serves ego by providing an emotionally satisfying narrative without requiring actual accomplishment. What we need instead is what the Stoics called appropriate action, doing what the situation requires rather than what feels passionate in the moment. This might mean grinding through boring technical details when we'd rather work on exciting, big picture strategy. It might mean having difficult conversations we'd prefer to avoid. It might mean doing work that nobody will ever see because it's necessary for the final product. None of this feels passionate, but all of it is essential. Holiday also warns that passion makes us volatile and unreliable. When we're driven by emotion rather than purpose, our effort fluctuates with our feelings. We work intensely when we're excited and slack off when we're not. We make impulsive decisions based on temporary enthusiasms. We quit when things get difficult because the passion has faded. Purpose provides the steadiness passion lacks, the ability to keep working even when it's boring, frustrating, or unrewarding. The canvas strategy, making others look good. Perhaps the most counterintuitive advice in the book is what Holiday calls the canvas strategy, finding ways to make other people look good, doing work that benefits others more than yourself, taking on unglamorous tasks that help the team succeed. For the ego-driven person, this sounds like a recipe for being exploited. But Holiday argues it's actually the fastest path to real learning and opportunity. The Canvas strategy works because it puts you in proximity to successful people, gives you access to important projects, and lets you see how things actually work, rather than just talking about how they should work when you're willing to do the unglamorous work that others avoid. The research, the logistics, the detail work, the support functions. You become invaluable, and you learn far more than the person who's too concerned with their status to get their hands dirty. Historical examples abound. Benjamin Franklin made himself indispensable to more prominent figures by doing excellent work they needed done. Bill Belichick started by breaking down game film for other coaches. Many successful entrepreneurs spent years in operational roles learning how businesses actually function before starting their own. In each case, ego would have rebelled against such subordinate positions, but humility recognized them as opportunities. The Canvas strategy also builds genuine relationships rather than transactional networks. When you help others succeed without immediately demanding recognition or reciprocation, you create authentic goodwill. People remember who helped them when they were struggling. They become genuine allies rather than reluctant connections. This pays dividends throughout your career in ways that self-promotion never could. Critically, the Canvas strategy isn't about being a doormat or accepting exploitation. It's about choosing to serve a purpose larger than your ego. You're still developing your skills, still building toward your goals, still creating value. You're just doing it in a way that helps others simultaneously and that keeps your ego in check by forcing you to subordinate your need for recognition to the requirements of the work. Restraint. Delaying gratification and recognition. Ego wants everything immediately. Recognition, reward, validation, success. It has no patience for the slow, unglamorous process of building something real. Holiday emphasizes that genuine achievement requires restraint, the ability to delay gratification, to work in obscurity, to build slowly and carefully rather than seeking immediate visibility. Modern culture makes restraint increasingly difficult. Social media provides instant feedback and validation. Success stories compress years of struggle into inspiring narratives that make overnight success seem normal. Everyone is hustling, promoting, announcing. The temptation to join this noise is overwhelming. But the person who resists this temptation and focuses on doing excellent work over an extended period builds a foundation that withstands challenges that destroy those seeking quick wins. Restraint also means knowing when to keep quiet, when to hold back, when to let things develop naturally rather than forcing them. The aspiring writer who frantically sends out their first draft will get rejections that could have been avoided by restraining the impulse to publish and doing more revision. The startup founder who launches prematurely loses customers they could have retained by restraining the urge to announce and building a better product first. 3. Part 2. Success. The dangerous peak. The paradox of success. If ego is dangerous during aspiration, it becomes potentially fatal during success. This is the paradox. The very moment when we feel most justified in our ego, when we've actually achieved something, is precisely when ego becomes most destructive. Success validates all of ego's promises, making it harder to resist. We feel we've earned the right to relax our discipline, to believe we're special, to stop doing the things that made us successful in the first place. Holiday identifies several mechanisms by which success corrupts. First, it creates a narrative where we're the hero, where our success was inevitable because of our special qualities. This narrative is seductive, but dangerous because it disconnects us from reality. We start believing our own press, thinking we've figured everything out, that we're somehow exempt from the rules that govern ordinary people. This belief is almost always false, and reality eventually corrects it, often harshly. Second, success brings attention and opportunities that feed ego. People want to interview us, praise us, learn from us. Offers multiply. Options expand. This should be good, but ego transforms it into a trap. We start believing we're as brilliant as people say. We say yes to everything because we can't stand to miss an opportunity. We lose focus on the core work that generated our success in the first place. We become celebrities in our field rather than practitioners. Always stay a student, learning after achievement. The student mindset becomes even more critical after success because the temptation to stop learning is strongest when we've proven we can do something. Ego tells us we've graduated, that we're now the teacher rather than the student, that we've earned the right to coast on our expertise. This is precisely when learning must intensify, not diminish. Markets change. Technology evolves. Competition improves. What worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. The successful person who stops learning becomes obsolete surprisingly quickly. History is littered with companies that dominated their industries only to collapse when they stopped innovating, because leadership believed their way was the only way. Kodak invented digital photography but couldn't imagine it would replace film. Blockbuster dismissed streaming. Nokia thought smartphones were a fad. In each case, past success created an ego that resisted learning. Holiday emphasizes that staying a student means actively seeking disconfirming evidence, welcoming criticism, and remaining open to being wrong. This is psychologically difficult because success makes us defensive. We've built an identity around being right, being competent, being successful. Admitting we might be wrong threatens that identity. But the alternative is stagnation, followed by irrelevance. Don't tell yourself a story, avoiding self-deception. One of ego's most sophisticated weapons is narrative. After success, we naturally want to understand why we succeeded. Ego provides a story where we're the hero, where our success was the inevitable result of our special qualities, where we single-handedly overcame obstacles through our brilliance and determination. This story feels good, but is almost always false. The truth is usually more mundane. We worked hard, but so did many others who didn't succeed. We made some good decisions, but we also got lucky in ways we don't want to acknowledge. We benefited from help we've forgotten, from timing we didn't control, from circumstances we didn't create. Our success was the result of many factors, most of which had nothing to do with our inherent specialness. The danger of ego's story is that it makes success non-replicable. If we believe we succeeded because we were special rather than because we did specific things in specific ways under specific circumstances, we can't recreate that success. We think we have the Midas touch when actually we just happen to touch the right thing at the right time. So when circumstances change, we keep touching things expecting gold but getting nothing. Holiday advocates for what might be called narrative humility, the discipline to resist heroic stories about ourselves and instead analyze our successes and failures with rigorous honesty. What actually worked? What was luck? What did others contribute? What mistakes did we make that happened not to matter? This kind of analysis is painful for ego, but essential for genuine understanding. What's important to you? Maintaining priorities? Success creates a dangerous abundance of opportunities. Everyone wants a piece of your time, your expertise, your endorsement. Ego wants to say yes to everything because saying yes reinforces our importance. But without clear priorities, this abundance becomes diffusion. We become scattered, superficial, busy, but not productive. Holiday emphasizes the necessity of constantly returning to the fundamental question: what's actually important to me? Not what looks impressive, not what other people think I should do, not what provides the most external validation, but what actually matters for my genuine goals and values. This requires knowing yourself well enough to have real answers and having the discipline to act on those answers, even when it means disappointing people. The successful person without clear priorities becomes a prisoner of their success. They're trapped on a treadmill of obligations they've accepted to feed their ego, speaking engagements that distract from their real work, advisory board positions that flatter but add no value, social media maintenance that consumes hours for minimal return. Each individual commitment seems reasonable, but collectively they consume the time and energy needed for deep work. Maintaining priorities also means being willing to walk away from things that no longer serve your purpose, even if they once did. The business that was perfect 5 years ago might be wrong today. The relationship that was mutually beneficial might have become parasitic. The project that started with promise might have become a burden. Ego resists walking away because it means admitting we were wrong or that circumstances have changed. Purpose embraces walking away when it's the right decision. Entitlement, control, and paranoia. Success's pathologies, Holiday identifies 3 pathologies that commonly afflict successful people, all rooted in ego. First is entitlement, the belief that we deserve special treatment because of our achievements. Successful people begin to expect deference, accommodation, exceptions to normal rules. They become demanding, difficult, impossible to work with. They've forgotten that their success came from serving others, not from others serving them. Second is excessive control. Success often comes from taking control of situations. So the successful person naturally wants to control more and more. But this becomes pathological when it prevents delegation, when it creates bottlenecks, when it burns out the controller through micromanagement. The irony is that the need for control usually comes from insecurity, the fear that others can't do things as well, that letting go means losing what we've built. Third is paranoia. Once we have something to lose, ego makes us obsessed with protecting it. We see threats everywhere. We trust no one. We become defensive and reactive rather than creative and proactive. This paranoia is exhausting and often creates the very problems it fears. The paranoid leader drives away good people through suspicion. The paranoid company stifles innovation through risk aversion. The antidote to all 3 pathologies is the same: gratitude, collaboration, and acceptance. Gratitude reminds us that success was never ours alone, that we benefited from luck and help we didn't earn. Collaboration forces us to share control and trust others. Acceptance acknowledges that we can't control everything and that trying to do so is futile. These practices directly counter ego's tendencies and keep success from becoming toxic. Managing yourself. Discipline after success. One of ego's most seductive lies is that success means we can finally relax our discipline. We've proven ourselves, so we deserve to coast a bit. We can let our standards slip. We don't need to be as rigorous about our routines, our health, our practices. Holiday argues this is precisely backward. Success requires even more discipline than aspiration because the temptations are greater and the stakes are higher. The aspiring person has nowhere to go but up, so their mistakes are relatively cheap. The successful person can fall far, so their mistakes are expensive. The aspiring person works hard because they have to. The successful person must work hard despite not having to, which requires a different, deeper kind of discipline. The aspiring person is motivated by external pressure. The successful person must generate internal motivation. Self-management means maintaining the practices that created success even after those practices are no longer exciting or novel. It means continuing to wake up early, to exercise, to read, to practice, to review your work, to seek feedback, to plan carefully, not because you're desperate, but because you're committed to excellence. This is much harder than it sounds because these practices lose their urgency once you've achieved something. Holiday also emphasizes managing the emotional volatility that success brings. The successful person experiences greater swings, higher highs from praise and achievement, lower lows from criticism and setbacks. Without self-management, these swings are destabilizing. The person becomes addicted to praise and devastated by criticism. They make impulsive decisions based on emotional extremes. They burn out from the constant drama. Stoic equanimity, the ability to remain steady regardless of circumstances, becomes essential. Beware the disease of me, individual versus collective. Pat Riley, the legendary basketball coach, coined the term disease of me to describe what happens when successful team members start prioritizing individual glory over collective success. After winning championships, players who had previously been selfless began demanding more playing time, more shots, more attention. The team that won through collaboration fell apart through individual ego. This disease affects not just sports teams, but any collective endeavor. Successful companies deteriorate when executives start empire building rather than serving the mission. Successful movements fracture when leaders start competing for prominence rather than advancing the cause. Successful families disintegrate when members start keeping score of who contributes more rather than supporting each other unconditionally. Ego is inherently individualistic. It says, what about me? What do I get? How does this make me look? These questions poison collective efforts because they shift focus from the mission to the individual. The cure is remembering that individual success is almost always built on collective effort. The star player needs teammates. The brilliant CEO needs employees. The celebrated author needs editors, publishers, readers. Nobody succeeds alone, but ego makes us forget this. Holiday emphasizes that fighting the disease of me doesn't mean suppressing individuality or denying personal ambition. It means channeling that ambition in service of something larger. The healthy team has individuals who want to excel, but they want to excel in ways that help the team win. The healthy company has ambitious executives, but they measure success by company performance rather than personal accumulation. The shift is subtle, but crucial. From my success to our success. Meditate on the immensity. Perspective through vastness. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, regularly practiced contemplating the vastness of time and space to put his importance in perspective. He would imagine the countless people who had lived before him and would live after him, the immense scale of the universe, the brevity of human life. This wasn't depressing nihilism, but liberating realism. If we're not that important in the grand scheme, we can stop taking ourselves so seriously and focus on doing good work. Holiday advocates for similar practices in modern life. When ego inflates our sense of importance, when we're obsessing over a slight or convinced our particular crisis is uniquely terrible, or believing our success makes us special, stepping back and considering the immensity provides correction. How many people have faced similar challenges? How many have achieved similar or greater success? How much will any of this matter in 100 years? This practice isn't about diminishing genuine achievements or dismissing real problems. It's about maintaining proportion. The successful entrepreneur who thinks they're changing the world might be doing good work, but they're not curing cancer or ending war. The person facing a career setback is genuinely struggling, but it's not the greatest suffering in human history. Proportion doesn't negate importance, it contextualizes it. Meditating on immensity also provides freedom from the tyranny of reputation. If we're specks in an infinite universe, if our lives are brief moments in endless time, why do we care so much what other people think? Why do we obsess over criticism or crave praise? The opinions of our contemporaries, which feel so important, are revealed as temporary and ultimately insignificant. This realization is liberating. We can do our best work without being enslaved by others' judgments. For Part 3, Failure, the Opportunity for Growth, the two faces of ego and failure. When we fail, ego responds in one of two equally destructive ways. The first is complete denial. This isn't really failure. It's someone else's fault. It's temporary bad luck. It doesn't count. The second is total collapse. This proves I'm worthless. I'll never succeed. Everything is ruined. Neither response serves us. The first prevents learning from failure. The second makes us unable to try again. Both are ego-driven distortions of reality. The denial response protects our self-image by refusing to acknowledge failure as real or meaningful. If we didn't really fail, if the game was rigged, if our partners let us down, if circumstances were uniquely difficult, then we don't have to change anything. We can maintain our existing beliefs about ourselves and our methods. This feels good in the short term, but guarantees we'll fail again in the same ways. The collapse response, paradoxically, is also about ego. It seems like the opposite. We're admitting we're terrible, but it's actually ego in a different costume. By making failure total and catastrophic, by defining ourselves completely by our worst moments, we're still making everything about us. We're still the main character, just in a tragedy instead of a triumph. This self-pity is a form of self-absorption. What Holiday advocates instead is clear-eyed realism. We failed. It matters. We need to learn from it and move forward. Not denial, not collapse, but acceptance and adaptation. This requires ego death of a sort. We have to let go of the story we told ourselves about ourselves and build a new understanding based on actual evidence rather than wishful thinking. Alive time or dead time. Choice in adversity. Robert Greene distinguishes between alive time and dead time. In alive time, we're learning, growing, preparing for future opportunities. In dead time, we're passive, waiting for circumstances to change, feeling sorry for ourselves. Holiday argues that failure presents this choice starkly. Will we use this time to improve, or will we waste it in resentment and self-pity? History provides countless examples of people who transformed periods of forced inactivity or failure into alive time. Malcolm X used his prison sentence to read voraciously and educate himself. Viktor Frankl used his concentration camp experience to develop logotherapy. Countless entrepreneurs used the 2008 recession to build skills, while others waited for the economy to recover. The difference wasn't circumstances, but choice. Alive time or dead time. Ego wants dead time, because alive time requires admitting there's work to do, that we're not as good as we thought, that we need to change. Dead time lets us maintain our self-image while blaming circumstances. We're still fundamentally great. We're just waiting for the world to recognize it. This is comfortable, but ultimately destructive because time keeps passing, regardless of whether we're using it productively. Choosing alive time means asking, what can I learn from this? What can I improve? What can I prepare for? How can I use this experience to become more capable? These questions are painful because they acknowledge deficiency, but they're also empowering because they identify actionable responses. We can't control what happened, but we can control how we use the time we have now. The effort is enough. Process over outcome. One of Stoicism's most powerful teachings is the distinction between what we control and what we don't. We control our effort, our preparation, our choices, our responses. We don't control outcomes, which depend on countless factors beyond our influence. Luck, timing, other people's decisions, circumstances we can't predict. Ego attaches to outcomes. Humility focuses on effort. When we define success by outcomes, failure is devastating because it suggests we're not good enough. Our self-worth becomes hostage to results we can't fully control. This creates tremendous anxiety and makes us risk-averse because failure feels existential. But if we define success by effort, by whether we prepared thoroughly, tried our best, made good decisions with the information available, failure becomes just information rather than identity. This doesn't mean outcomes don't matter. They clearly do. But it means we evaluate ourselves on process rather than results. Did I do everything I could? Did I give my best effort? Did I make good decisions? If yes, then I succeeded regardless of the outcome. This is radically different from participation trophy culture that says everyone's a winner. It's rigorous self-evaluation focused on what we actually control. Holiday emphasizes that this mindset is especially critical in fields where success depends partly on luck or factors beyond our control. The actor can control their audition, but not whether they get cast. The entrepreneur can control their product, but not whether the market is ready for it. The athlete can control their training, but not whether they stay healthy. In all these cases, obsessing over outcomes is a recipe for misery and paralysis. Focusing on effort is empowering and sustainable. Fight Club moments. Necessary destruction. Sometimes ego needs to be completely shattered before we can build something real. Holiday calls these Fight Club moments after the Chuck Palahniuk novel where the protagonist's apartment is destroyed, forcing him to rebuild his life from scratch. These moments are painful but potentially transformative because they destroy the false self-image that ego has constructed. The person who's coasted on natural talent hits a level where talent isn't enough and must develop discipline. The person who's succeeded through bluster and confidence encounters a situation where substance matters more than style. The person who's never faced real adversity experiences genuine hardship. In each case, their existing self-concept is revealed as inadequate, forcing them either to grow or to retreat into delusion. These moments are gifts, though they rarely feel like it at the time. They create an opportunity to ask, who am I really? What do I actually value? What kind of person do I want to become? Without the pressure of catastrophic failure, we rarely ask these questions honestly. We're too invested in our current self-story. But when that story is destroyed, we can build something more authentic. The question is whether we'll use these moments constructively or waste them. Ego wants to quickly rebuild the same structure that just collapsed, just with better PR. It wants to externalize, blame, and maintain the core narrative. Humility sees these moments as chances for genuine transformation, to admit hard truths, to change fundamentally, to become someone different and better, draw the line, knowing when to quit. Ego has trouble admitting when something isn't working. It doubles down, insists we're right, refuses to quit even when quitting is clearly the rational choice. This is because quitting feels like admitting we were wrong, which threatens our self-image. So we throw good money after bad, good time after wasted time, continuing to pursue strategies that have failed because stopping would require acknowledging failure. Holiday argues that knowing when to stop, when to change course, when to admit defeat, when to cut losses, requires tremendous courage and self-awareness. It's not giving up. It's making an intelligent, strategic decision based on evidence. The entrepreneur who shuts down a failing business to start a better one isn't weak. They're realistic. The writer who abandons a novel that isn't working to write a better one isn't a quitter. They're learning. The sunk cost fallacy is ego in economic form. We've invested time, money, effort, reputation in something. So quitting feels like wasting that investment. But that investment is already gone, whether we continue or stop. The only question is whether we'll waste additional resources on something that isn't working. Ego says to continue because it can't admit the initial investment was a mistake. Wisdom says to stop the bleeding. Drawing the line also means knowing your limits. Ego resists limits. It wants to believe we can do anything if we just try hard enough. But some things really are beyond our capabilities, at least currently. Some goals really aren't worth pursuing. Some battles really can't be won. Accepting these realities isn't pessimism. It's wisdom that allows us to redirect energy toward things we can actually accomplish and maintain your own scorecard. Internal standards. Warren Buffett talks about having an internal scorecard rather than an external one. External scorecards measure success by what others think. Wealth, status, fame, recognition, social approval. Internal scorecards measure success by personal standards. Did I do my best? Did I act according to my values? Am I becoming who I want to be? The difference determines whether failure destroys us. When we use external scorecards, failure is catastrophic because it means we've lost in the only game that matters, other people's judgment. The business that fails, the book that doesn't sell, the project that gets rejected, these aren't just setbacks, but indictments of our worth because we've defined worth by external success. This makes us fragile, defensive, and ultimately unable to take the risks necessary for genuine achievement. Internal scorecards provide resilience because they judge us on things we control rather than outcomes we don't. Did I work hard? Did I act with integrity? Did I learn from mistakes? Did I treat people well? These questions can have positive answers even when external outcomes are negative. This doesn't mean we ignore results, but it means our self-worth isn't hostage to them. Holiday emphasizes that maintaining an internal scorecard requires knowing yourself well enough to have genuine standards rather than just rationalizations. It's not about lowering the bar or making excuses. It's about having a clear sense of what actually matters to you, not what society says should matter, not what impresses other people, but what you genuinely value. This clarity makes failure less existential and success more meaningful. Always love, the ultimate antidote. Holiday concludes the failure section with what might be the most important principle in the book. Always love. Not romantic love, but the choice to care about something beyond yourself. When you love the work more than you love your own image, failure can't destroy you. When you love the craft more than you love being recognized as a craftsman, criticism can't break you. When you love the mission more than you love your role in it, setbacks can't stop you. This kind of love is the ultimate antidote to ego because it's fundamentally outward focused rather than inward focused. Ego asks, how does this make me look? How does this affect my status? What do I get from this? Love asks, how can I serve? How can I contribute? What does the work need? The shift is subtle, but transforms everything. Failure in the ego framework is devastating because it threatens our self-image. Failure in the love framework is just information about what the work needs. Love also provides motivation that outlasts ego-driven ambition. Ego burns out because it's exhausting to constantly worry about how you look, what others think, whether you're winning. Love sustains because it finds meaning in the work itself rather than in external validation. The writer who loves writing can write for decades without recognition. The researcher who loves discovery can pursue questions no one else cares about. The teacher who loves students can teach in obscurity. None of this is possible for ego, which needs constant feeding. Finally, love allows us to fail gracefully. When we love what we're doing, failure is disappointing, but not catastrophic. We can pick ourselves up, learn what we need to learn, and try again because our commitment is to the work rather than to our image. We can take criticism because improving the work matters more than defending our ego. We can change direction because serving the mission matters more than being right. This flexibility and resilience make success more likely while making the journey more meaningful regardless of outcomes. 5. Stoic philosophy, the foundation, the Stoic framework. Holiday's entire argument rests on Stoic philosophy, particularly the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. Understanding Stoicism is essential to understanding why ego is the enemy and how to fight it. At its core, Stoicism teaches that we don't control what happens to us, but we do control how we perceive and respond to what happens. This distinction is critical for managing ego. The Stoics divided existence into two categories: things within our control and things outside our control. Within our control are our judgments, our choices, our effort, our character. Outside our control is essentially everything else: other people's opinions, outcomes, circumstances, fortune. Ego constantly confuses these categories, trying to control what it can and neglecting what it can. When we attach our self-worth to things outside our control, what others think of us, whether we win or lose, whether we get recognition, we make ourselves vulnerable and anxious. We're constantly at the mercy of circumstances and other people. But when we focus on what we control, our effort, our integrity, our response to events, we become resilient and effective. We can't control whether our business succeeds, but we can control whether we work hard and make good decisions. We can't control whether people like us, but we can control whether we act according to our values. Perception, action, will. The Stoic disciplines. Stoicism traditionally identifies three disciplines: perception, how we see things; action, what we do; and will, how we respond to what's outside our control. Each provides tools for fighting ego. The discipline of perception teaches us to see things clearly rather than through ego's distorting lens. When something bad happens, ego wants to catastrophize or externalize blame. Clear perception sees the situation objectively: what actually happened, what it means, what can be done about it. The discipline of action focuses on doing what's right and appropriate, regardless of outcomes or recognition. Ego wants to do what looks good or what feels comfortable. Stoic action asks, what does the situation require? What would a good person do? What serves the greater good? These questions cut through ego's self-serving calculations and point toward genuine virtue. The discipline of will involves accepting what we can't change while working to change what we can. Ego rebels against this, demanding that reality conform to our preferences. When we don't get what we want, ego throws a tantrum. Stoic will accept reality as it is while maintaining agency over our response. We don't control the weather, but we control how we dress. We don't control the economy, but we control our savings. We don't control other people, but we control our reactions to them. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king. Marcus Aurelius provides Holiday with perhaps his most important model. A man with every reason for ego. Emperor of Rome, tremendous power and wealth, famous lineage, who instead practiced profound humility. His meditations, written to himself as philosophical exercises, show a man constantly reminding himself of his insignificance, his mortality, his duty to others. Marcus writes about how temporary everything is, how all our striving ends in death, how the opinions of others are fleeting and meaningless. This isn't nihilism, but perspective setting. By regularly contemplating his own mortality and insignificance, Marcus prevented his enormous power and success from inflating his ego. He remained a student of philosophy throughout his reign, constantly working to improve his character rather than resting on his achievements. What makes Marcus particularly relevant is that he wasn't a philosophical hermit removed from worldly concerns. He was managing an empire, fighting wars, dealing with political intrigue, facing constant pressure and criticism. His philosophy wasn't abstract theory, but practical wisdom for handling enormous responsibility without letting it corrupt his character. This makes him an ideal model for modern people trying to manage success without succumbing to ego. Epictetus. From slave to sage. If Marcus shows how someone with everything can resist ego, Epictetus shows how someone with nothing can maintain dignity. Born a slave in Rome, Epictetus had no control over most of his life circumstances. He couldn't choose his profession, his residence, or even his own body. His master permanently disabled him. Yet he became one of history's most influential philosophers by mastering what he could control, his judgments and responses. Epictetus's fundamental teaching is that we're disturbed not by things, but by our judgments about things. This is directly relevant to ego because ego is essentially a set of judgments about ourselves and our importance. When we're insulted, the insult itself has no power over us. It's our judgment that we should be treated better and that we deserve respect, that this insult matters, that creates our disturbance. Change the judgment and the disturbance disappears. This teaching is liberating because it means we have far more control than we think. We can't control whether people insult us, criticize us, reject us, but we can control whether we let these things disturb our peace of mind. Ego makes us vulnerable to every slight and setback because it judges them as threats to our importance. Stoic wisdom makes us resilient because we judge them as external events that don't define our worth. 6. Historical examples and case studies. William Tecumseh, Sherman. Ego-free greatness, Holiday, frequently returns to General William Tecumseh Sherman as an example of someone who achieved tremendous success while maintaining remarkable freedom from ego. Sherman had every opportunity for ego, military genius, crucial role in winning the Civil War, celebrity status. Yet he consistently deflected credit, refused political office despite being urged to run for president, and subordinated himself to the mission rather than seeking personal glory. What makes Sherman's example powerful is that his ego-free approach made him more effective, not less. By not caring about credit, he could focus entirely on winning the war. By not worrying about his reputation, he could make controversial decisions that others avoided. By not seeking political power, he maintained the moral authority that came from pure service. His lack of ego was a strategic advantage, not a limitation. Sherman also demonstrates the canvas strategy perfectly. Early in his career, he served in unglamorous positions, doing essential work that others considered beneath them. This gave him detailed knowledge of logistics, geography, and operations that proved invaluable when he reached command. His willingness to do necessary work without needing recognition built the foundation for his later brilliance. Katharine Graham, from insecurity to mastery, Katharine Graham inherited control of the Washington Post after her husband's suicide, taking over despite crippling self-doubt and no business experience. Her story illustrates how humility, in the form of knowing what you don't know, can be more powerful than false confidence. Graham didn't pretend to have expertise she lacked. Instead, she became an obsessive student, learning the newspaper business from the ground up. What's remarkable about Graham is that she transformed personal insecurity into professional humility. Where ego would have demanded respect without earning it, Graham earned respect by acknowledging her deficiencies and working tirelessly to address them. Where ego would have surrounded itself with yes men, Graham sought out people who knew more than she did and actually listened to them. Her lack of ego-driven defensiveness made her an exceptional learner. Graham's finest moment came during the Pentagon Papers and Watergate, when she had to make decisions that could destroy the paper. Ego might have played it safe to protect her reputation and wealth. Instead, Graham focused on what was right, publishing the truth despite enormous pressure and risk. Her willingness to subordinate personal concerns to principle shows how humility enables courage. Howard Hughes, The Cautionary Tale. If Sherman and Graham show ego-free greatness, Howard Hughes shows what unchecked ego destroys. Hughes started with tremendous advantages and genuine brilliance. He revolutionized aviation, made successful films, built an empire, but ego gradually consumed him. His need for control became paranoia. His confidence became delusion. His success isolated him from feedback until he lost touch with reality entirely. Hughes's descent illustrates how ego creates the conditions for its own destruction. His insistence on controlling everything prevented him from delegating, creating bottlenecks that crippled his businesses. His paranoia drove away competent people, leaving him surrounded by enablers and sycophants. His refusal to accept aging and limitation led to increasingly bizarre behavior. The brilliant aviator ended his life as a mentally ill recluse. What makes Hughes's story particularly tragic is that his talents were real. He genuinely was brilliant, at least initially. But ego prevented him from managing success. Each achievement inflated his sense of importance and exemption from normal human constraints. He began to believe his own mythology. And because no one could tell him otherwise, he'd driven away or dismissed anyone who might have. His delusions went unchallenged until they became destructive. Angela Merkel, quiet competence. Angela Merkel provides a modern example of ego-free leadership. As Germany's chancellor for 16 years, she wielded enormous power yet maintained remarkable humility. She avoided the cult of personality, didn't seek the spotlight, focused on competent governance rather than dramatic gestures. In an era of ego-driven political theater, her understated approach was revolutionary. Merkel's success came precisely from her lack of ego. She listened more than she spoke. She changed her mind when presented with evidence. She credited others for good outcomes and took responsibility for bad ones. She didn't need to be the smartest person in the room. She needed to make good decisions. This approach made her one of the most effective leaders of her generation. What's striking about Merkel is that her humility was strategic, not just temperamental. She understood that ego-driven leadership creates unnecessary conflicts, prevents collaboration, and makes it harder to change course when circumstances change. Her ego-free approach gave her flexibility and resilience that more theatrical leaders lacked. She could admit mistakes, form unlikely coalitions, and adapt to new realities because her identity wasn't invested in being right or looking strong. 7. Practical applications for daily life. Daily practices for fighting ego. Fighting ego isn't a one-time achievement, but a daily practice. Holiday advocates for specific routines that keep ego in check. First is morning reflection. Beginning each day by reviewing your principles, reminding yourself of your mortality and insignificance, setting intentions focused on virtue rather than achievement. This Stoic practice, exemplified by Marcus Aurelius, prevents ego from dominating your mindset before the day begins. Second is seeking honest feedback regularly. Ego hates feedback because it threatens our self-image, so we must deliberately create structures that force us to receive it. This might mean regular one-on-ones with mentors who will tell you hard truths, anonymous employee surveys if you manage people, or accountability partners who monitor specific behaviors. The key is making feedback normal and expected rather than exceptional and threatening. Third is maintaining a learning practice, reading, studying, training in something you're not already good at. This keeps you in the student mindset and prevents the complacency that comes with expertise. The successful executive who takes Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes gets humbled regularly by people half their age and salary. The famous author who audits college courses stays intellectually curious. The wealthy investor who learns to play piano practices accepting being a beginner. Fourth is regular service to others, volunteer work, mentoring, helping without expectation of return. This directly counters ego's self-absorption by forcing you to focus on others' needs. It also provides perspective. Whatever problems you're facing, someone else is facing worse. Whatever success you've achieved, someone else needs help you can provide. Service reminds us we're not the center of the universe, recognizing ego in the moment. Ego operates largely unconsciously, so learning to recognize it in real time is crucial. Holiday suggests several warning signs. If you feel defensive when criticized, that's ego protecting your self-image rather than learning from feedback. If you need to dominate conversations or always be right, that's ego seeking validation. If you resent others' success or need to diminish their achievements, that's ego feeling threatened. Another warning sign is comparing yourself to others. Ego is fundamentally competitive. It needs to establish superiority to feel okay. So when you find yourself measuring your success against others, tracking who has more followers or makes more money or gets more recognition, that's ego operating. The healthy alternative is competing with yourself. Am I better than I was last year? Am I living according to my values? Am I doing my best work? Obsessing over what others think is another clear ego signal. If you're constantly imagining how others perceive you, crafting your image, worrying about reputation, that's ego-seeking external validation. The antidote is focusing on whether you're proud of your work regardless of others' opinions. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback. That's ego too. But it means not being enslaved by others' judgments. Finally, notice your emotional reactions to events. If minor setbacks devastate you or minor successes elate you disproportionately, that's ego making everything about you. Stoic equanimity, remaining steady regardless of circumstances, is the goal. This doesn't mean not caring. It means not letting outcomes define your worth. Workplace applications. The workplace presents constant ego challenges and opportunities for practice. When presenting ideas, ego wants to dominate the discussion and dismiss competing viewpoints. The ego-free approach is presenting ideas clearly, listening genuinely to objections, and caring more about finding the best solution than about being right. This makes you more effective because the best ideas emerge from collaborative refinement, not individual brilliance. When receiving criticism from a boss or colleague, ego wants to defend, justify, explain why the criticism is wrong. The better response is thanking them for the feedback, asking clarifying questions to understand their perspective, and taking time to consider whether it has merit before responding. Even if the criticism is partially wrong, there's usually something to learn from it. When someone else gets credit for work you contributed to, ego screams injustice. But the Canvas strategy suggests this is exactly what you should want early in your career. The opportunity to contribute to successful projects regardless of recognition. If it becomes a pattern of exploitation, that's different. But occasional uncredited contributions are normal and valuable learning experiences. When you achieve success at work, promotion, successful project, recognition, ego wants to celebrate yourself and maybe diminish others' contributions. The healthier response is genuine gratitude to everyone who helped, recognition that luck played a role, and increased commitment to excellence rather than relaxation of standards. Success should make you more humble, not less, because it reveals how much you depended on circumstances beyond your control. Relationship applications, personal relationships are where ego often does its most destructive work. In arguments with partners, ego demands to win, to prove the other person wrong, to protect our self-image as reasonable and right. This destroys relationships because it prioritizes being right over being connected. The ego-free approach asks, what actually matters here? Is being right more important than the relationship? Can I acknowledge my contribution to the problem? With children, ego wants them to reflect well on us, to validate our parenting, to make us look good. This creates pressure that damages kids and prevents us from seeing them as independent beings with their own paths. Ego-free parenting focuses on what they need rather than how they make us look, accepts that they'll make different choices than we would, and find satisfaction in their well-being rather than their achievements. With friends, ego creates competition and comparison. We feel diminished by their successes or threatened by their attention to others. Ego-free friendship celebrates others' wins genuinely, recognizes that their success doesn't diminish us, and focuses on mutual support rather than status jockeying. This makes friendships deeper and more satisfying. In all relationships, ego makes us defensive, competitive, and self-absorbed. Humility makes us curious, supportive, and other-focused. The difference transforms how we relate to people and dramatically improves our relationships. 8. The paradox of ego. The central paradox of Holiday's argument is that ego promises to give us everything we want: success, happiness, recognition, power, but actually prevents us from achieving or enjoying these things. Ego says, believe you're special and you'll succeed. Reality says, recognize your ordinariness and work harder than everyone else. Ego says, defend your self-image at all costs. Reality says, acknowledge your flaws and improve them. Ego says, seek recognition. Reality says, do excellent work and recognition may follow. But it doesn't matter if it doesn't. This paradox appears in every domain. The person obsessed with appearing confident often comes across as insecure because true confidence doesn't need to broadcast itself. The person desperate for respect rarely receives it because respect must be earned through competence and character, not demanded. The person chasing happiness by focusing on themselves usually ends up miserable because meaning comes from contributing to something larger than yourself. What makes ego so persistent, despite its consistent failure to deliver on its promises, is that it provides short-term emotional satisfaction while creating long-term problems. Defending yourself from criticism feels good in the moment, but prevents learning. Broadcasting your achievements feels validating temporarily, but makes you dependent on external approval. Believing you're special provides comfort, but prevents the hard work required for actual excellence. The path beyond ego involves accepting its opposite. You're not special, you don't know everything, you need help from others. Your success depends partly on luck. Your failures contain important lessons. These truths are painful for ego, but liberating for the spirit. They free you from the exhausting work of maintaining a false self-image and allow you to focus on genuine improvement and contribution, success through humility. The people who achieve the most substantial and lasting success are typically those who maintain genuine humility. This isn't false modesty or self-deprecation, but realistic assessment of themselves and their circumstances. They know what they're good at and what they're not. They recognize when they need help. They give credit to others. They learn from failure. They stay hungry despite success. This humility makes them better learners, better collaborators, better leaders. They don't waste energy defending their ego or protecting their image. They focus on doing excellent work. They build genuine relationships rather than transactional networks. They make better decisions because they're not committed to being right. They adapt to changing circumstances because they're not invested in a fixed self-conception. Paradoxically, this humility often creates the recognition and status that ego sought directly but could never achieve. People trust humble competence more than arrogant brilliance. They want to work with people who give credit and admit mistakes rather than people who demand validation and deny culpability. The humble person often rises further precisely because they're not obsessed with rising. 9. Conclusion, the path forward. Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy presents a challenging but ultimately optimistic message. The challenge is that our greatest obstacle to success, happiness, and growth is ourselves, specifically, our inflated sense of self-importance. This is uncomfortable to accept because it means we can't blame external circumstances for our failures. The buck stops with us. But the optimism lies in recognizing that if we're our own worst enemy, we're also our own potential savior. We can't control the economy, our competitors, other people's opinions, or countless other external factors. but we can control our ego. We can choose humility over arrogance, learning over defending, service over recognition, purpose over status. These choices are difficult, but entirely within our power. The path forward isn't a one-time transformation, but a daily practice. Every day presents opportunities to choose ego or humility in how we respond to criticism, how we handle success, how we deal with failure, how we treat others, how we measure ourselves. The battle is never fully won because ego is always looking for an opening. But each small victory, each moment we choose humility, makes the next one easier. What makes this work more than self-help platitudes is its foundation in Stoic philosophy and historical example. The principles Holiday presents aren't new. They're ancient wisdom that has guided thoughtful people for millennia. Marcus Aurelius faced challenges we can barely imagine, yet maintained remarkable humility. Sherman achieved military brilliance while remaining ego-free. Graham transformed personal insecurity into professional excellence. These examples prove that transcending ego isn't just theoretically possible, but practically achievable. The ultimate insight is that ego is not just morally wrong, but practically counterproductive. This isn't about being nice or humble for ethical reasons, though those matter. It's about recognizing that ego actively prevents us from achieving what we want. The person who can transcend ego doesn't just become a better person. They become more effective, more successful, more resilient, and more fulfilled. Holiday's work invites us to examine ourselves honestly. Where is ego operating in our lives? How is it holding us back? What would change if we replaced ego with humility, self-promotion with service, defensiveness with curiosity? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten our self-conception. But they're also liberating because they point toward a better way of being in the world. The journey from aspiration through success to failure and back again is universal. Everyone faces these phases multiple times throughout life. What determines whether we navigate them successfully is largely whether we can keep ego in check. Can we remain students while aspiring? Can we maintain humility during success? Can we learn from failure rather than being destroyed by it? These aren't personality traits, but skills we can develop through practice. In the end, fighting ego isn't about self-negation or becoming small. It's about becoming your authentic self rather than the inflated character ego creates. It's about doing your best work rather than looking impressive. It's about contributing to something larger than yourself rather than making everything about you. It's about living with purpose, integrity, and humility. Values that have always defined human excellence and always will. The choice is ours, every day, every moment. Ego or purpose, appearance or substance, recognition or contribution, being right or being effective. Choose wisely, choose consistently, and choose with the courage that comes from knowing that in fighting our ego, we're fighting for our best selves. Final reflections. This exploration of Ryan Holiday's Ego is the Enemy reveals a work of remarkable depth and practical wisdom. By grounding his arguments in Stoic philosophy and illustrating them with historical examples, Holiday creates a framework for understanding how ego sabotages us and how humility liberates us. The book's three-part structure, Aspire, Success, Failure, provides a roadmap for recognizing ego's different manifestations throughout life's journey. What makes the book particularly valuable is his refusal to offer easy answers or comfortable platitudes. Fighting ego is hard. It requires daily vigilance, honest self-examination, and the courage to admit uncomfortable truths about ourselves. It means doing unglamorous work, accepting criticism, giving credit to others, admitting mistakes, and constantly questioning our own certainty. None of this is easy, which is why so few people do it consistently. Yet the reward for this difficult work is substantial. Greater effectiveness, deeper relationships, more sustainable success, increased resilience, and genuine fulfillment. The person who transcends ego doesn't just become more virtuous, they become more capable. They learn faster, collaborate better, adapt more readily, and sustain effort longer. In every domain, business, art, science, leadership, relationships, humility outperforms arrogance. As we conclude this comprehensive analysis, the invitation is clear. Examine your own life for ego's influence. Where are you talking instead of working? Where are you seeking recognition instead of doing excellent work? Where are you defending your image instead of learning from feedback? Where are you making things about you instead of about the mission? These questions, honestly answered, point the way forward.